Hello, everybody. I think we normally have a timer when I get started, but I forgot to hit. I forgot to hit the countdown this week, so I'm just going to stand here and talk for a few minutes. Probably not about anything particularly important, just to fill the time. So welcome to the live stream. This is a stream I do most weeks at 2 p.m. Europe, London time. At the moment, that's British summertime. We've got beautiful blue skies, sunny day, cherry blossom outside in Edinburgh, which is where I am in Scotland. If you're just joining, please stick your name and where you are joining from in the comments. It's always nice to see where people are. It means that I'm not just kind of talking to a camera in silence. Well, I mean, I'm still doing that, but it's sometimes nice to see a kind of response in the chat. So, yeah, this is a FastAPI and MongoDB tutorial this week. I've been working. I do this live stream most weeks. Haven't actually done it for the last 2 weeks. Chris is back. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining us this week. Great to see you again. So yeah, I've been building an ODM. So I've been building an ODM over the last few weeks. It's kind of an experimental ODM meant to abstract some of the design patterns that you might use when building with MongoDB. And it's got to a point where it kind of reads and writes. It's certainly not a complete ODM. It's very much an experimental thing, but I think it's kind of proving the pattern that I wanted to. And I've been porting it to async.io the last couple of weeks. Hi, Darwo. Thank you for joining us. Great to see you here. Yeah, just the first couple of minutes of this live stream, we let people trickle in, so it takes a little while to get some numbers. Again, I've seen the numbers go up. If anybody's just joined us, please let us know where you're joining from in the chat. It's always nice to see. So this week, I initially thought I might use docbridge to sort of extend a very basic FastAPI application that I put together a few weeks ago as a bit of a proof of concept. I think it only has one endpoint at the moment. But I published an article a couple of days ago called 8 Best Practices for FastAPI and MongoDB applications. And I thought it might be interesting to kind of build a FastAPI app using some of those principles, talk about those principles as we go along. Yeah, we'll see how far we get because we've only got an hour. So I will share my screen. I might bring up that blog post actually before I do that. So let me close some windows. I'm sorry, I've been writing scripts. I've been preparing for this live stream. So I've actually been working quite hard. I've messed up the data in my database, so none of my tests work anymore because they're all dependent on the data in my database, and I didn't set a random seed for when I was generating the data. So I ran the script again, and it's completely wiped the database and filled it with data that doesn't match what my tests are expecting. So that was fun. Let me just look up my MongoDB.com developer. There we go. So yeah, I've got a few more windows open than I would normally have, and I'm maybe not quite set up to start the live stream as I would usually be. So please excuse me while behind the scenes, I just move some windows around to make sure that you're not going to get to read my email, which I've done before, and that was I was disappointed in myself, if I'm being honest. Right. So, okay, this looks good. Here we are. I'm going to make the text a bit bigger. So I built this. I wrote this blog post. It's built on a bunch of experience. FastAPI, if you haven't used it before, is an async framework that kind of specializes in building RESTful APIs, but it competes very much with, say, micro frameworks like Flask in that you can integrate a templating language really easily with it. And the thing that really differentiates it is that it works very natively with Pydantic in terms of data validation, data serialization, and it's built on top of async.io. It's actually built on the Starlet framework that Tom Christie wrote. So yeah, it's becoming increasingly popular. It doesn't insist that you use a relational database behind the hood. So it actually works really nicely with MongoDB, especially with ODMs like Odmantic and Beanie that are both built with Pydantic and on top of MongoDB. So they sort of handle MongoDB and the serialization for the API for you. So I thought we might kind of build something with that. There's a few, I mean, you can see the table of contents down the right-hand side. So it's saying maybe consider an ODM, a Pydantic ODM. Think about serializing objects and initialize your database connection correctly. So that could be the first thing that we could do. And then I'm going to generate some data. So I've known from when I've done webinars before that people are quite interested to see the process of building out queries. So I thought we'd build a sort of semi-complex query with an aggregation pipeline and just sort of see where we go from there. So if that sounds interesting, stick around and let's get into some code. So as I say, just made my font sizes a lot bigger. So I've been building this Twitter clone. This Twitter clone is called Y. That is a pun on the fact that Twitter has been renamed to X. And yeah, it's difficult to tell whether things are funny when you're sort of telling those jokes to yourself and everybody else is on the stream. But yeah, I enjoy it. I was using docbridge before. So with docbridge, you extend a document class and then you define a bunch of fields on it. And then you pass BSON to it, basically, and it provides a wrapper around that BSON. Doesn't do any deserialization by default, but it does do kind of mapping. And I built something to map over essentially a join, but it's being done as an aggregation pipeline here. It's not actually being done as a join. I think we'll do a lookup in a bit, and so we can work with joins in MongoDB just like any relational database. And I thought we might do that. Beanie actually looks quite similar to this. Oh, and then there was because I've only had profile data in my database, I was making that data available using an endpoint. These are called path operations in FastAPI. I'm not quite sure why they needed a new term, but that's what these are. I'm going to alternate between calling them endpoints and path operations. So yeah, this is a get operation on this path, which sort of makes sense when you use that terminology. I quite like it. So you pass it a user ID and it passes you the profile data back. Let me just see if this will actually run. So I think I left this in a running state. Haven't actually run this today. So this has activated a virtual environment. I've got 2 directories above. So let me just check that is, yeah. Unicorn is my async server, also written by Tom Christie, I think. Yeah, so I have a just file here. The just file is just a task runner. It's a bit like make, but it doesn't do the kind of file dependency stuff. It's a really handy way of just recording various different command line sort of flags and things that you might want to run again and again. And this is one that I always have to kind of think about. And sometimes I leave flags off by mistake. In fact, this almost certainly isn't the complete command line I would usually want to use. But at least if I remember to use other flags as we go along to specify host or port or whatever, I can kind of add them into this just file as I go along as a bit of a reminder. So anyway, because I have just, I'm not going to copy and paste this into my terminal. I'm just going to run just run like this. Oh, yeah, there we go. So you can see it's running that command line. It's set up. It's running on port 8000. Let's see what happens. There we go. So it says not found. This is because it's the root path, and I haven't specified anything at the root path because I was only really using the API Explorer, which is generated for you. And here we go. So this is really nice. I can try out that endpoint by providing a user ID. I used to know what came back if I provided 4 at this as this parameter, but now it's just a profile that was randomly generated a few minutes ago. Oh, there we go. Somebody called Ian Gonzalez. And it's generating followers with a DB ID, and I genuinely don't know why I'm getting that data. That should be a list of followers. Maybe this is something to do with my query. Yeah, I think this is probably my query in the application. So let's go back to that in a moment, because I don't think that's what I have in my database. Let's go and have a look. Why not? So we go to find. Oh, that's feeds. So I got Y profiles. So this is kind of what I'm looking at. Here's my followers array. Let's see what's in there. A bunch of objects, or subdocuments rather. Each of these subdocuments has their own ID. And I'm obviously serializing those. So yeah, I've done something in my application in the way that I've used docbridge to mean that it's sort of filling in. There we go. See, I'm just iterating through the database IDs and returning those. I could. Oh yeah, because I'm generating my JSON manually. I can just take user ID because this is a string. Oops, follower.user ID. So each one of these is a follower object because my docbridge library is wrapping them as a follower. I've told it to do that up here. So I said that here, it's a sequence field and it's of type follower. And I've also given it another query to run. I've said basically if I run out of followers that are embedded in my document, then I want you to start loading them in using this query. So it loads them in from a separate collection. That's this followers collection that's sort of like an overflow of followers so that my profile documents don't get too big. And yeah, it just sort of unwinds them and then it brings them up to the top level. We'll have a look at those in a minute in a query in case I know I'm going quite quickly. I sort of want to get to the point where we're writing code. So let's run that test path again, and there you go. So each of these followers now has a user ID. That's a bit better. That's what sort of the kind of thing you'd expect to see if you were using an endpoint for profiles for a profile in a Twitter type application. So I'm going to ditch all this now. Maybe I'll just comment it out because sometimes it might be handy to refer to it again. And then I'm going to import Beanie. Now I've already installed Beanie, so I'm going to comment that out from Beanie. Oops, Beanie. Interesting. It should work. And then I'm going to say class profile document. I don't need to specify ID. So by default, it assumes that you have an underscore ID that is an object ID. And I do. So it will just handle that for me. And it will rename it in the API to ID without the underscore. So it sort of takes away that MongoDB specific stuff. Oh, I apologize, Alexandro or Alejandro, maybe. I'm using a library called Beanie, MongoDB Beanie. There we go. Yeah, so this is an ODM. So this is a library that sits on top of, in this case, Motor, which is our asynchronous driver for using async IO with MongoDB. And this allows you to define classes that map to documents in your database. So instead of getting back these dictionaries, sort of high-level mappings, and looking up keys and finding out whether they have values or whatever, Beanie provides that ability to just sort of define a Pydantic class, actually, say what type it should be, and then you get that validation and serialization from it, which is really cool. And it also knows how to query objects of this type. So this is kind of, it's very similar to the library that I've built, but it doesn't abstract away patterns like the bucket pattern. Let me just go through this demo and hopefully it will make sense. If it doesn't make sense, like any questions you have, like drop them into the chat. Okay, so I'm practically going through the tutorial. Really, I'm defining a document. Here we go. So I'm going to go through the document and just pull out some of the keys. So I want user ID, username, full name, birth date's nice because it's a date time, and like MongoDB stores BSON, so it can store date times natively. We call it a date time type, sorry, rather than a date time, but that's what it is. It's a date and time combined. Yeah, those will do. And so yeah, sorry. I'm just pasting them in so I can remember what the keys are. So here we go. Let's indent those. Just been lazy really rather than typing them out myself, but there we go. So user ID is a string. So these are using Python type hints to say what types these should be. These are all strings. And the birth date is a date time. Yeah. And then email is also a string. Let me just go up and from datetime import datetime. Core Python types. Right, so I've got that. Now I can query a profile by user ID by using this. So whereas I'm doing queries with Motor directly, I should be able to just do db.find one and then profile user. This is really clever, and then use double equals and then the user ID that was passed in. So that's actually that's built a query for me out of this sort of magic Python stuff. So the way that this works is if you obtain a one of these fields, a user ID off the profile class, it's overridden the equality operator. So when you do an equality operator, it's not actually conducting that equals, it's just sort of wrapping that up. It's kind of going, yes, this query is now a user ID equals this value. I can't really explain it any better than that. If you've been following through how we built the docbridge libraries, some of this will hopefully make sense because we've been overriding some of these sort of magic Python things. And here so notice one of the things when I wrote this, one of the things I said was it's good to take data from whatever objects in your database and kind of copy it into your response object. That way you've got a fixed type that your response is going to be. You're not at the whims of whatever was stored in MongoDB if the database changes. So in this case, like this might if the user ID isn't there, I might get some sort of exception when I try and copy it over, rather than just returning an object without a user ID. So that would flag to us in tests, hopefully, or at least at worst in staging, that the database scheme has changed and this application needs to change to deal with those changes. But in this case, there's some quite clever stuff we can do. So I can do, profile equals. So I can just return the profile directly. And the reason I can do that is because it will be validated. So this object that's coming back, it will validate the fields there against what's stored in the BSON. So it makes sure that it matches what I want to return. And just to add some extra sort of MyPy validation, I can say this endpoint returns a profile, which I think is kind of cool. I really think that's kind of cool. I'm not entirely certain this is going to work first time, but let's see what's happening. I haven't got any tests, so the only way to test this is really to just go in here, run, because it's JavaScript. I can just literally hit execute again. And there we go, internal server error, just what I expected. So attribute error, user ID. It's upset about me looking up user ID on profile. And I don't know why that is, because profile has a user ID. I haven't redefined profile. Huh. Oh, you know what? I'm searching directly on the database. I should be searching for a profile. And one more thing, I haven't told the profile where it's stored. So this is, I think this is called settings. And then you say name equals profiles. So now when I look up a profile using the find one method, it will hopefully return me one of these profile objects. Let's just try that because I'm feeling lucky. No, of course not. So it's still doing this attribute error thing. Attribute error user ID. All right, so time to go back to the documentation. Inserting, finding documents. So search criteria should be product price. Oh, I mean, it should be in await as well, because it's asynchronous, but that's still not, it's still having trouble looking up this profile. Let's just print dear profile. So this should give me the keys on the profile class. Let me just try that again. Oh, wait. So So ton is saying that I need to specify field alias ID, and that's not actually the case. So I do know why you're saying that, but the default is that an ID it assumes an ID, and when you're defining a document, ID. Here you go. So um, each object of type document has ID automatically. So yeah, if it was another field, if I was mapping user ID to ID, which I'm not, then I would need to provide a field mapping to do that. But because underscore ID, I'm not looking it up based on the primary key. I'm actually looking it up on the user ID field. So let me have a look. Let me show you that in here. I'm actually looking it up on this property, this field here, not this field here. And partly that was just to simplify passing in object IDs versus this. It's basically a number stored as a string. I hope that makes sense. So I'm still not sure why it's not finding my user ID, because it's there. But maybe, and have I from Beanie import documents? That's right. Let me have one more go at running this. I'm still going to get the same error. Awesome. Hi, Karthik. Great to see you. Thank you for joining. If you've just turned up, I've written some Beanie code for looking up an object in MongoDB, and it's failing. Like at the first hurdle, I'm doing a find one, and I'm failing at this. Yeah, attribute error, user ID, await dependent call, la, 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 la. I don't know if you've worked with ASCII applications very much, like ASGI. Asynchronous applications generally run under ASCII servers. Uvicorn is an ASCII server, but I find like everything happens in a sort of an asynchronous sort of stack of calls, and it makes the stack traces very difficult to find exactly where you were working. So there's Starlet, there's FastAPI, there's my code. It was there right at the bottom, but there we go. Did I get anything from my print call? I'm doing print debugging, which is, there we go. So yeah, this is my class because it's a document. It's got lots of stuff here. And we should have a user ID. But that's quite a long list, isn't it? Let's take that and put that in a temporary. Comma, replace with n. There we go. Find one, find many. It's almost like this is a document and not a document subclass. So yeah, there's no fields on this at all. What have I done? Have I done something really stupid at the syntax level? Class, profile, document. User ID is a string. I mean, this. Oh, here we go. Maybe the user ID in, yeah. So I got another suggestion from Tan. Thank you. Yeah, maybe the user ID isn't a string. That's not actually, so at this point hasn't actually contacted the database. It's literally just trying to build a query based on my class definition. I have almost certainly done something really silly. I'm just not quite sure exactly what. This always happens. This always happens as soon as people are watching you. I had a really good couple of hours before this live stream where I was just kind of getting code written and it was mostly fine. So yeah, we know that profile is a Beanie class because it's got all these find methods and everything, and I can call find one. Let's have a look at the docs again. Right. Class, sample, document. That's all good. And then we can call await sample, find one, sample.num. I will say the other day when I was using this, I did find it very difficult to find out what was actually going on. Tell you what, let's instead of finding this at the server level and having to, so Lookman has said it thinks that the profile variable is ambiguous, but I did think that when I had, I had commented out profile before, but I know that this profile is actually this profile class because that's basically something that we check down here. I'm gonna. So Tan, that's so the syntax you're giving me there for that find one query is essentially PyMongo or Motor query syntax. So because I'm using the Beanie library, I'm not calling find one on a collection. I'm calling find one on this class. So it's kind of equivalent to here we go, finding documents. It's kind of equivalent to this here, where I'm looking up on a product class and I'm saying find, or find one in my case, and I'm providing it the key, essentially the field that I want to look up on, and then a comparison that I want it to make. I can use native syntax, but I really don't want to. Although maybe if I do that, sorry, I see what you mean. That is an alternative way. Let's try it out and see what happens. Because this not getting very far with this, am I? Right, user ID. Okay. And then, oops, it's not there. I got too many tabs open. A classic problem. There's my calendar. I'm getting flustered now, you see. That's what happens. Internal server error. Collection was not initialized. That's what it is. There is a function that I need to call to initialize my initialize Beanie. Basically, tell it what database it's connecting to. So that's what I haven't done. It's really, really dumb. Right. So we're getting there. Let's look at initialization. So you're jumping through the tutorial. So basically what you do is you create your async IO motor client, and then you have to init Beanie and pass it the database and the models that you're interested in. And this does talk to the database. I think I can talk to the database, so it can initialize indexes and things. So let me do that here. Thank you for your patience. So there's my, can't do that here. You know what? This comes really nicely to how to initialize your database correctly. So in a FastAPI application, you shouldn't really initialize your application at the top level, especially in an asynchronous application, because this because you can't call await. You can't use await at the top level. So I kind of need this to be an asynchronous function. Kind of want an asynchronous function that gets called on startup. Thank you so much for your help, Tan and Lookman. Really appreciate your help. And Adebayo, really appreciate your help as well. I can see that you're looking for user ID int under the profile class, but it is actually a string. I know it's got. The reason there's a number in a string in a database was something I did on purpose, so that I could show how you mapped from one type to another. So the idea was we would have like bad data in the database, and I could put a shim over that using my ODM. So let's talk about best practice number 2, ironically. 8 best practices. Number 2, initialize your database connection correctly. So There used to be event handlers in FastAPI. You used to have an event handler for startup, an event handler for shutdown. That's not the way that they work anymore. These days, you create a lifespan object, and I've just noticed an error in this code. There should be a decorator over this. So yeah, it takes an app, and it actually should be an async context manager. So let's and there's a couple of things. I'm going to copy and paste this code because other than that, it's okay. So let's define this. This is so these days with a lifespan function, it handles both startup and shutdown. And the reason is so that you can use with inside it and kind of wrap, startup and shutdowny things. So this is an async context manager. So from context lib import import async context manager. So that's a decorator, goes over a function that yields once. So async context manager. Right, and then just to run you through the code, this connects to my client. It creates my connection, my client. I've imported it as motor client. Not quite sure why I did that. Let's get rid of that. It's an unusual thing to do. I'm also loading MDB URI. I'm going to load that into this connection string variable. That's something we can do at the top level. I realize I'm jumping back and forwards through the code. I hope this is still making sense. App FastAPI. We'll move that down a little bit because we're going to be needing this variable. And then that is the database. I'm going to put that in here. So I'm just creating a local name as well as assigning it to my app object. So my database is going to be called Y. I'm looking at, so here I'm using, I can use DB, make that a little bit shorter. So there's a few things that I'm doing here. So firstly, I'm wrapping up all my asynchronous database connection code in here. But there's a mistake people often make with especially PyMongo, thinking that when you initiate a motor client, it connects to the database, or at least like it does some stuff with this connection string. And that is not the case. Ooh, I really messed that up, didn't I? I shouldn't have left that behind. I'm just leaving this here for the moment. Let me comment it out so it's less distracting. But it doesn't. And you'll notice from the async API, there is no await here. So it's not doing any IO. So all I'm doing is initializing an object. I've said this a few times when I've been doing these live streams, but it's always worth going back to. And so what I'm doing, and even getting a database, also not an asynchronous function. It's not doing anything. It's just kind of handing you back an object that sort of wraps up a future database connection. It's only when you call things like command, or when you start looping through results, or when you insert data, that you actually connect to the database. All of those are asynchronous operations. So what I do is, because I don't want to start my application running for an hour and then somebody hits an endpoint that requests the database and then everything goes bad. I want my application to fail on startup if it can't connect to the database, because that indicates something's really bad. Hopefully then somebody's pager will go off and they can go and find out why the database connection isn't working. So what I do is, as soon as I've created my client, I send a ping command to the database. That hands back a document with an OK field, which weirdly is a float. It's either 0.0 or 1.0, which 1.0 means OK. And so I'm just wrapping that with an int. I don't know why it returns a float. It's not a sensible thing for essentially a Boolean value. But there we are. So I'm checking that it's OK. And if it's not OK, I raise an exception. So my application startup will fail. And if not, I just int log as info. I'm going to change that to a print because I haven't actually got any logging in this application. Anyway, this is now our startup block. And then I yield from this lifespan function. And then anything after that will be run on shutdown. So in that case, I'm just closing down my MongoDB client, just sort of saying like, well, yeah, close all your connections, close the thread pool. So yeah, and it's worth knowing, although async.io, the motor client is an async.io library, it wraps PyMongo. So it actually wraps a thread pool. It's not a natively asynchronous library. So yeah, there are some slight anomalies there, and I think I encountered one of them earlier today. Right, so I need to init Beanie on startup. That is an asynchronous operation, so I have to do it inside an asynchronous method. This is as good a place as any. So once I've checked that my database connection is okay, I'm just going to init Beanie. I'm going to parse it. Yeah, I'm going to. That's interesting. Client.db name might be another error in that example code. Just going to pass it DB. That's my local reference to database, and then I'm going to pass it my document model. Okay, and then one last thing to do is when I initialize my FastAPI application, I need to pass it a lifespan. It only takes one lifespan, but obviously in your lifespan code, you could wrap other lifespans or kind of loop through them. So they do compose if you need to. Okay. Whew. Well, it started up, so that's nice. Let's go back to the page and make a request and see what happens. I'm not feeling quite so confident now that this is going to work first time, but it does. Well, I say first time, it's taken 10 minutes, isn't it? Okay, so there we go. I've got my document back. Notice that the only fields in here are the ones that I've defined on my profile class. So there's kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the underscore ID, which is implicit. It's implicit. That's not Pythonic. So there we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are my fields. Any other data that comes back from the database, it will be filtered out. Any data that's returned from this function that isn't in there will be filtered out. So if there are any sort of hidden fields, this just adds a nice last sort of point of safety to say like no users should be seeing this data. So until it's added to here, it's not part of my public interface. Followers is a list of follower objects. Each follower has a user ID, so let's just create one of those. Class follower base model. So if it's not actually a top-level document, you use a Pydantic base model. So I'm just going to from Pydantic. And I'm going to import field as well, because I might need that at some point. Breaking all the rules of Yagni, you ain't going to need it. Here, so I've got a list of followers. I've got, yeah, I'm going to put this up here just so they're defined in order. I think I could use a string to access follower, but it doesn't really matter. And list, I need that from typing. You find yourself importing things from typing in Pydantic when you use Beanie, which is all good. I don't know that this is going to work. I actually haven't done this specifically. I think I may need to do something else to get it to load these in. Appreciate your support, Tan. It's genuinely really nice to see you here again. And yeah, so so user ID string. So each follower really represents another profile, but it's only got a subset of that user's data in there. So you can always do another query to get more data if you need it. So I think that error is from the previous reload. Let's try. Execute. There we go. Look at that. I filtered it down. So I've just got the user IDs of all the embedded followers. Now, this isn't going to join in data from the other collection. So if I want more followers, I'm actually going to have to request those. And I don't really know how to do that in Beanie. Potentially, I could make followers a descriptor, so that when I get hold of it, I get the sort of chained followers, including the embedded followers and the followers in the other collection. So because these are bucketed, like the followers are in well, there's a bucket pattern documentation, which is useful, but not actually what I wanted to show you. So we've got a profile here. We've only ever got 20 followers in the profile. And then if there's any more followers, they go in the followers collection, which is kind of designed to be joined in. So yeah, these are the followers for user ID 0. And there might be more than one of these as well. So yeah, you see there are actually 4 documents in here containing extra followers, because each one only contains 20. So it's worth noting that what was that? Sorry, I'm reading the chat at the same time as trying to describe what's going on here, so I've kind of thrown myself off. So yeah, normally you would bucket at 200. So you want your maximum size of any array in MongoDB to be about 200. That's the recommendation that we make. Your documents get less efficient to kind of traverse if you have more than 200 items. But just to demonstrate, so without dealing with too much data to see on the screen, I've been limiting it to 20 instead of 200. Oh, Anirudh is back. Hi, Anirudh. Yeah, I'm sorry you're late. I mean, to be honest, I've been stumbling through basic Beanie usage. So we're using Beanie with a FastAPI application. And I had an excellent holiday. Thank you very much. My daughter delivered 2 lambs on a farm because we were there for her work experience. And otherwise we went for walks in the country. It's really rather nice. I'm glad you could make it, at least for the last 20 minutes or so. So yeah, I keep talking about bucketing and joins, but given that we've got this sort of working now with Beanie, I'm going to try and get this working so that it automatically pulls in the extra data. So we can start talking about data access layers next week, in next week's stream. But for now, I want to take a slight 90-degree turn and talk about some data generation, because that's something that I wanted to build a profile. A feed endpoint. And so I was writing some code for that. The feed, basically, it's a bucket of tweets, posts for each user. So the idea is, if I'm user 4, these would be a bucket of 20 posts. You don't want to store them all in. You might want to store them all in separate documents, but if you do, you've got one index item for every tweet. Whereas, like, often, if there's small amounts of data, they're usually requested together. It's worth keeping them in the same document. If data is requested together, store it together. So yeah, I've been building some sample data for this, and I thought there were some quite interesting queries that sort of came up as to how I built this feed data, given the data that I had in the database. So the idea of this is each object in here is actually a different tweet, only contains when it was posted, who it was posted by. Well, that's actually a mini version of their profile. I was removing followers in the latest time I ran this, and then the actual message, which is auto generated. I'm using a library called Faker to generate the fake data. Adebayo's saying that they prefer Odiomantic instead of Beanie. I haven't really used Odiomantic. I have skimmed the documentation, but I have to admit I really like Beanie. Beanie has an extra feature that I don't believe Odiomantic has, which is migrations. Not entirely certain where that is in the documentation. There we go. It was added relatively recently. But if you've ever used Django and you've needed to migrate your data and actually transform it in the database, handling migrations, the change to your schema automatically is really nice. It's a really powerful tool. And Roman, the author of Beanie, has been implementing this so that it can detect your schema and then detect diffs in your schema and automatically generate the changes to your data. Anirudh has asked which is the most or least like Alembic, and I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question, but if anybody is in the chat and happens to know the answer to that question, like, feel free to drop that in. Maybe Adebayo knows the answer. So I want to let's have a look at building up some queries, because that Well, I always find it fun. I really like the aggregation pipeline. I know I've said this before, but it's super powerful and I find it really intuitive to work with. So I have these scripts. I have a script called populate. I should probably break this down into smaller functions, but this was really a utility script I wrote to generate all of that user profile and follower data. So it does some sort of basic initialization. I've now got 3 collections that I'm working with: profiles, followers, and this new feeds collection. And each time it's run, it basically drops the collection and then recreates them, including indexes. Just because I didn't want the collections to get bigger each time I run it by mistake. And I wanted to make sure the indexes were sort of managed. The easiest way with disposable data is just to drop it and recreate it again. So as I say, I'm using Faker. I'm now setting a seed. So ideally, each time I run this, it should generate pretty much the same data, or at least it's starting with the same random seed. And initially, I create a bunch of profiles. I have a static value called, which says I want 100 profiles. And it just inserts a bunch of these. This would be faster if I did a batch insert, like with insert many. But then I would have to work out what size I wanted the batches to be. And again, like just going for speed of development right here. Profiles are generated automatically. Like one nice thing about Faker is it can just generate you a profile, which contains a user ID, a username, a full name, birth date. None of them match up. It's like I kind of wish it would generate the username from the full name in some cases. Like, so you'd get somebody called Fernandez and their username might be Fernandez51 or something like that. But yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. So, and then I've got a bio. It just generates a paragraph of lorem ipsum text. So it creates all those. But then then it adds the followers. So for each profile, it decides how many followers that profile should have. Then it runs this pipeline to get some. In fact, this is interesting. So it basically gets all of the profiles from the database except the current profile. Then it does a random sample. This is all done in the database, so it's all really memory and efficient and fast. And then you do a projection because I only want the user ID, really, or maybe I did want those 3 values. I can't remember why. So yeah, I really agree with Anirudh here. Aggregation pipelines are a bit like drugs. Like they're scared, and well, I assume they are. Don't take a lot of drugs, if I'm being honest. Aspirin from time to time, but once you get the hang of it, you're hooked. Yes, you don't tend to get hooked on aspirin. I kind of hope aggregation pipelines are more efficient. Like, I think if you're able to cook eggs with aggregation pipelines, you should probably add some indexes to your data. So then I was just sort of generally like adding those randomized profiles, like subset of that data, to the followers for the profile that I'm currently looking at. So that's just an update there. So that's how those are created. And then I started trying to create these feeds. So the idea was you look through, I have to find the people I'm following. So that's not something I'm actually modeling in the database. I probably would if it was a production database, but I just happen not to be doing that. I'm going to comment these out because honestly, it's a little bit tedious watching it generate all this data. But what I can do is I can generate some tweets. So print tweets to feed. This is a command line tool, so I can just use print statements to tell me what's going on. And then I'm just going to generate them for a single user profile. So that's I usually use profile 4 for some reason. So, but I'm going to pretend that I might loop through some user profiles at some point, because I probably will. For user ID in, do you know, I just realized, I think it was Adebayo said, I can use lowercase list. I did just want to actually say, yes, you're absolutely right. Since I think Python 3.10, is that right? I don't need to use capital list from typing. I can use lowercase list because it also works with type hints now. It never used to, but it does now, which is quite nice. So there we go. That works. Right, back to my population script. I did just want to give you some credit for that, Adebayo, because that was good advice. So for user ID in 4, I want to, what am I doing? I want an aggregation that will get me all the people I'm following. So let's build that up as an aggregation. I tell you what, let's build that up in the web interface, because that's going to be a little bit easier, I think, to sort of build it up step by step, and not have to worry too much about the syntax. Y feeds. Oh no, sorry, I'm looking it up from profiles. So this is where I'm going to conduct my aggregation. Click on the aggregation tab. I apologize for how much space this takes up. I hope everybody can read the text. So this is a sample of the data. Oh, there we go, aggregation. Click on aggregation. So this is a sample document in there, and I basically want this where there's one follower with my user ID, which is 4, right? So that's actually a match stage. Match is the same as find, if you haven't worked with it before. Don't worry, this is going to get more complex. If you've worked with aggregation pipelines before, we're going to be using lookups and replace root and unwind. So I can say followers.user ID is the string 4. It is important because it is MongoDB is type safe. Thank you, Coding by AMP. I'm glad you're enjoying the tutorial. They're always a little bit like random, and obviously sometimes things don't work the way they're supposed to, but you know, that's all the fun of a live stream. Anna, yeah, I'm really sorry there wasn't a commit immediately last time, and that was 3 weeks ago. But yeah, I will get a commit pushed up straight after this. And yeah, Adebayo is quite right. Like Faker's great, but it is limited in the type of data that you can generate. You can always write your own providers, but then that sort of partly misses the point of using Faker, doesn't it? So Tan was asking if Beanie drops all the document models when starting up the application. So if you're asking whether it's dropping all the collections, no, it doesn't. I think it does ensure that indexes are created correctly on application startup, but I could be wrong about that. I think I've seen some documentation about telling it to avoid doing that. So yeah, that's something to consider. So these give me the documents that I want. In profiles. Oh, wait. No, that's the wrong way around. Sorry. I should be looking this up in followers. So what have I got here? I've got a user ID, and one of these followers will have my user ID in here. So that's actually right. Yeah. Okay. I've just realized this isn't the best way to do it. Let's ignore the first 20. I apologize. This is kind of dumb. Let's have a look at followers instead. So I want, I'm basically doing the same query in here. There's a reason for this. The reason I want, and I can combine these two queries. So in fact, I would want to look up all of my follower, the people who are embedded in my own, in the main profiles. This is where the complications come in with the subset pattern when you've got your data split across two collections. Is you essentially need to do two queries and combine the results together, because I've got some of my follower data in profiles and some of my follower data in followers. So here, this is a match again. I can actually type in it. Oh, there we go. It's a really cool tool, this, I have to say. I was a little bit snobbish about it at first, because it was like, well, I can write these. I don't need a GUI tool. But actually, it's quite especially nice to be able to see the results of each stage. So here I've got my followers. Notice that's not a full profile. Although maybe I don't need a full profile. Well, that was what I was going to demonstrate anyway, so let's demonstrate it. So here, if I wanted a full profile for each of these, in fact, yeah, that's right, I've only got user ID. So yes, that would be my profile is in one of those followers things. So we can do a couple of things. I can join this user ID against the profiles collection. So if you haven't done this before, MongoDB fully supports joins with a command called lookup. Why am I looking it up? Why am I trying to find it in a long list? And there's a few different, you can actually attach an aggregation pipeline to this, which is really cool. I can run an aggregation pipeline for each item in my collection. And Adebayo has recommended a library called Mimesis for generating fake data. So, okay, thanks for the recommendation. I will have to check that out. Maybe this will all be rewritten in Mimesis by next week. So what I'm doing is I'm joining this follower to their own profile data. So I'll look it up in profiles. We are sort of running out of time, so let me see if I can get this done. So my local field is user ID in here at the top level. The foreign field just also happens to be called user ID. And I want to embed the results as profile data. So when it runs this, it's now running it. I've now got profile data here, which will be an array, always with a single item in, because each follower always has a profile. That's now got much more data about this user. And in fact, that's all the data that I want. So I want to bring that up to the top level, which actually takes 2 steps. So the first step is to do what's called an unwind. So an unwind takes it takes a path to an array. There's some extra flags in there, but this is the thing you actually need. Paths start with $, I think. Ooh, do I need an expression here? No, I don't think I do, actually. Let's try it without. This is profile data. So this should be an array. Oh, okay, maybe it should be $. There we go. So now, whereas in here, profile data is an array. For each item in the array, it will, did I mean followers.userid? Oh, that's what I've used in, for the lookup. No. For the lookup, what I'm doing is I'm joining the follower user ID to the profile user ID. So I don't need to specify follower or profile. This is follower because I'm looking this up in the followers collection, and this is profiles.user ID. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, and I'm not looking up the user IDs for the embedded followers because these are my followers. So user ID 5 is following user ID 4. That's what I want. That's why I wanted to look this one up. And I know that it's following user ID 4 because I've in here, one of these will be user ID 4. But it's randomly in there. So so I am looking it up on that top level user ID. So now I've got an object. So for each item in the array, it will emit one document with all of my original documents data and that item replacing the variable name. It doesn't explain very well. You can see it really easily in that I've got one item in here in my array, and so this will be one document with that one item in it. But if I had 2 items, I'd get 2 almost identical documents, but the profile data object would be different. So once I've got that, I actually want to bring it up to the top level. So this is now using replace root. This is not a bad use of the last 10 minutes or so, I think, of the live stream. So this takes does take a document, right? So I can never remember whether I need to start these with $1 or not. So excuse me if I get this wrong first time. Profile data is now an object, and so I can bring it up to the top level, and it should be $1. There we go. So now this is a profile for each one of the people I am following. So replace with. You think it should be that command should be called replace with? I'm not 100% certain what you mean by that, Anurad. Let me know. So that was my query, and then once I've built that up in here, I can export to language, and it knows I like Python, so it's just giving me that, and then I can put that in here. So what am I doing? Following equals. Have I got followers at the top level? I think I have. Yeah. Followers.aggregate, and then I paste in that pipeline, and then I re-indent it because for some reason rough is not indenting the code in this particular script, and it's really bugging me. And then the last thing is to take out this hard coding to the user ID. even though it's hard-coded above. So now that gives me all of the people I'm following, and so I can generate tweets for all those people. I mean, that's the idea basically. So let's see. Oh, I started like 1 minute late. So let's see if we can generate these. Actually, you know what? I haven't got time, because I was going to show how we use find one and update with an upsert to generate these buckets. So the idea is you keep inserting them into the current document until you have 20 items, and then it automatically creates a new bucket. I might start the next live stream with that, but I don't want to spend too long on this, because really you've all come for the FastAPI content. So I would like to get back to that. But I would like to say thank you very much for coming this week. It's been nice to have a couple of weeks off, but honestly, it's always really nice to come back to the live stream. I really appreciate the support you give me when things aren't going to plan. Yeah, next week, more FastAPI stuff, extending Beanie if we can to abstract some of these patterns that I've been talking about for a few weeks, maybe bringing docbridge back in and making it work nicely with Pythonic in some way. Those are the things that I'm planning to do in the next few weeks. Tan has asked for thoughts about the best design pattern to design an API combining Beanie, FastAPI, and MVC or something. Okay, I have some thoughts on that. We use FastAPI a lot inside MongoDB. There's a whole bunch of internal tools I've discovered are built using FastAPI. And so we're having some conversations about exactly that stuff internally. We've got a few template projects, and I'd be happy to talk about how you kind of build these things up. Do check out that article, the 8 best practices with FastAPI and MongoDB. There should be a link in the description. I think it's the first item under resources. I really enjoyed writing that. And honestly, like, I'm hoping people are going to come back with feedback as to best practices that they use that maybe I can add to that article, maybe make it 9 or 10 best practices, so to really help people out, really help share that knowledge. So thank you very much for being here, and hopefully I will see you next time. Have a good week.